The fog was thick that evening, spreading across the quiet streets like a pale ghost. Nora Whitfield stood before an old building at the end of a narrow lane in the small English town of Whitby. It was her grandmother's doll shop, the Dollmaker's secret, abandoned for years. The wooden sign above the door swung weakly in the wind, creaking like it still remembered the laughter that once filled this place. Nora hesitated before entering. She hadn't been here since she was a child, and even then, she remembered being afraid of the dolls. They had always looked too real, too alive. In her hand, she held a brass key sent by her grandmother's lawyer after the funeral. Attached to it was a short note written in faded ink. "Everything you need to understand our family is inside, but be careful what you wake." The words had chilled her ever since, but curiosity was stronger than fear. Nora turned the key in the lock, and the heavy door creaked open. The smell hit her first, a mix of dust, varnish, and something faintly sweet, like old perfume. Inside, the air was cold and still. Rows of dolls sat silently on wooden shelves, their glass eyes reflecting the dim light coming through the front window. Some smiled, others frowned, but all seemed to watch her at the moment. She stepped inside. Her boots echoed on the wooden floor as she walked slowly down the aisle. "Hello," she called softly, half expecting someone to answer, but there was only silence, and the faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the back room. The dolls were perfect, too perfect. Some wore lace dresses yellowed with time. Others had tiny silk shoes and ribbons in their hair. But what bothered Nora most was how lifelike they looked. Their expressions weren't painted in simple brush strokes. They looked felt. Every little detail was there. Sadness, curiosity, even fear. It was like the dolls had once been human. Trying to shake the feeling, she went behind the counter into the workshop. Dust covered everything, but the tools were still neatly arranged, as if her grandmother had only stepped away for a moment. There were paintbrushes, glass eyes stored in little jars, and delicate hands carved from wood. On one table sat an unfinished doll, its porcelain face smooth and pale, lips slightly parted as though about to whisper a secret. A sudden creak made her spin around. The door behind her had shut by itself. Nora's breath caught. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a shadow slipping between the shelves, but when she blinked, it was gone. "Get a grip, Nora," she whispered. "It's just an old building." Still, the silence pressed against her ears. She needed light. Finding an old oil lantern, she struck a match and lit it. The flame flickered, throwing long shadows across the room. That was when she noticed something odd. The dolls on the nearest shelf were now facing her. She was certain they had been facing forward when she first came in. Her skin prickled. She slowly stepped back, clutching the lantern. The air seemed colder now. In the far corner of the workshop, a dusty curtain hung over something large. Curious, she pulled it aside. Behind it stood a tall wardrobe, old and locked. She noticed a small eye-shaped keyhole, the same shape as the key she held. Heart pounding, she slid the brass key inside. The lock clicked. Behind the wardrobe door wasn't another storage space. It was a narrow wooden staircase leading downward into darkness. "Of course," she murmured nervously, "there's always a basement." The air that rose from below was colder, heavier. With the lantern held high, Nora descended the stairs slowly, each step groaning under her weight. The smell changed. It wasn't dust anymore. It was something damp and old, like stone and earth. At the bottom was a hidden workshop, much larger than the one above. On the walls hung sketches, each showing a child's face beside a doll that looked exactly like them. Under each drawing was a name: Emily, Thomas, Lydia, Henry. Dozens of them. Nora's throat went dry. These weren't just drawings, they were portraits. Every doll had a real child behind it. On a nearby table lay a small wooden box. She opened it slowly. Inside was an old diary wrapped in yellowed paper. The cover was cracked and the pages brittle. She read the first entry aloud, voice trembling. "To give them life, you must take another. G. Whitfield, 1893. She stared at the words, her stomach twisting. Her grandmother's name was Grace Whitfield. Did that mean the lantern flickered? The room grew colder. And then she heard it. Faint, soft laughter. Children's laughter, echoing from somewhere deep in the shadows. Her heart pounded so hard, she could barely breathe. "Nora," a voice whispered. It was high-pitched, childish. And close. She froze. Slowly turning around, she saw tiny porcelain feet peeking from under a table. Then, one by one, small figures stepped into the light. Dolls, dozens of them, their heads tilted in unison. Glass eyes gleaming with something that wasn't reflection. It was hunger. The lantern dimmed again. The whispers grew louder, overlapping laughter, crying, soft voices calling her name. Nora, stay with us. Her trembling hands dropped the diary. The lantern went out completely. Darkness swallowed her. And from that darkness came a single sound. The tiny creak of a doll's neck turning toward her. Then, a whisper, clear as ice, welcome home. When Nora opened her eyes, the lantern was cold in her hand, its light long gone. She lay on the basement floor, surrounded by darkness so thick it felt alive. For a moment, she wasn't sure how long she had been unconscious. Minutes, maybe hours. The only sound was the soft drip of water somewhere in the distance. Her pulse pounded in her ears. It was a dream, she whispered shakily. It had to be, but as she stood, the sound of small porcelain feet moving across the floor reminded her it wasn't a dream. It was real. The dolls had moved. She had heard them whisper. She turned the lantern's knob again, and after a few tries, the flame flickered back to life. The warm light spread across the basement, revealing what she had only glimpsed before. Dozens of dolls, neatly arranged in rows, all facing her. Their glass eyes shimmered in the light, and their perfect faces were still. But their presence felt heavy, watchful. The diary lay open where she had dropped it. The pages had turned on their own. The next entry read, "The first life was easiest, so small, so trusting. Her laugh still echoes in the clay. I hear her when I work at night." Nora slammed the book shut, her stomach twisting. Her grandmother wrote this, Grace Whitfield, the kind old woman who had sent her birthday cards and peppermint candy when she was a child, had written this. But the words didn't sound like her at all. They sounded like someone else, someone dark. A sudden bang echoed from upstairs. Nora jumped, clutching the lantern. Then came a slow, dragging sound, wood against wood. Something heavy was moving above her. She swallowed hard and climbed the stairs. Each step creaked beneath her boots. When she reached the top, the workshop was colder than before. The front door was wide open, letting in a sliver of fog from the street. And in the center of the room stood one of the dolls, the unfinished one from the table. Its head, once blank, now had faint markings of a face, to dark spots where eyes should be, and a line curving into a faint smile. Nora froze. She hadn't painted that. A whisper came from behind her, soft and childlike. You shouldn't have opened the door. She spun around. No one, but she felt the breath, cold and real, brush her ear, panic rising. She grabbed her phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The screen flickered, glitched, and then went black. Her reflection in the glass lingered half a second too long before fading. She turned back to the doll, but it was gone. The floorboards creaked behind her again. She spun, heart racing. Nothing, just rows of dolls, still in their places. But something was different. The dolls' faces seemed closer, more human now. The shadows under their eyes deeper, their smiles wider. Then she heard the faintest sound humming, a soft, tuneless melody, coming from the back of the shop. It was the same lullaby her grandmother used to hum when Nora couldn't sleep as a child. Her knees felt weak. Slowly, she followed the sound to the back wall, where the wardrobe stood open, revealing the dark stairs below. But the humming wasn't coming from the basement now. It was coming from the walls themselves. She pressed her ear to the wallpaper and nearly screamed. She could hear scratching like tiny hands clawing to get out. The wallpaper bulged slightly under her touch. That's when she saw it, a small porcelain finger poking through. A tear in the paper. Nora stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. No, this isn't happening, she whispered. The dolls on the shelves trembled slightly, as though they were laughing without sound. The air filled with the faint scent of roses, her grandmother's favorite perfume. Then, clear as day, a voice echoed through the room, soft, sweet, and horribly familiar. You came home, my little Nora. I've been waiting for you. Nora froze. The voice wasn't in her head. It came from the shop itself. The shadows stretched across the walls like living ink. The lantern flickered again. Grandmother, she whispered. You always had your mother's hands. The voice crooned, delicate, perfect for shaping faces. The floor creaked as though someone was walking toward her, but no one was there. Only the faint outline of footprints appeared in the dust. Small ones, barefoot, leading toward her. Stop, Nora shouted, backing away. You're dead. You're not real. The air turned icy. Every doll's head on the shelves snapped toward her in one sharp motion. The sound was deafening, porcelain cracking, joints clicking. Their mouths opened in perfect unison, releasing a single, chilling whisper. Stay. Nora screamed and bolted for the door. She pushed it open, stumbled out into the fog, and ran into the street. The cold air hit her like a wave. She didn't stop running until she reached the inn where she was staying. The innkeeper, an older woman with kind eyes, looked up from the counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost, dear," the woman said. Nora could barely breathe. "That house," she gasped. "The dolls, they moved, they spoke." The innkeeper's face went pale. "You mean the old Whitfield shop?" "Yes," Nora said. "It was my grandmother's." The woman slowly crossed herself. "Then you'd best stay away from there. That place hasn't been right since your grandmother died. People hear children crying from the basement at night, and no one who's gone down there ever comes back the same." Nora's hands trembled. She wanted to believe the woman was exaggerating, but deep down, she knew it was true. There was something evil in that house, something tied to her family, and it was calling her name. As she lay awake that night, she could still hear the faint lullaby humming in her ears, the same one from the shop, and when she turned to the nightstand, she froze. Sitting beside her bed was a small porcelain doll. Its face was blank, unfinished, but written in perfect handwriting. Across its tiny chest were 2 words, "For Nora." Nora didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the faint sound of humming, her grandmother's lullaby, echoing from somewhere in her mind, and every time she opened her eyes, she half expected that porcelain doll on her nightstand to move. When morning finally came, the doll was gone. Her stomach turned cold. She hadn't touched it. She hadn't even dared to look at it after seeing her name written on its chest. Now, it had vanished without a trace. Nora packed her things quickly, intending to leave Whitby before the day was over. But when she reached her car, something strange happened. The engine refused to start. The dashboard lights flickered, and then the radio turned on by itself, playing a soft, old-fashioned tune, the same lullaby. "No," she whispered, slamming the radio off. It came back on, the same song. Something wanted her to stay. Nora pushed open the car door and stepped back onto the foggy street. The shop loomed down the lane, its windows dark and lifeless, but she swore she saw a flicker of movement in the upstairs window, like someone was standing there watching her. Her grandmother had always told her that the dolls were special. As a child, Nora thought that just meant they were handmade, but now she wondered, what did special really mean? There was only one person in town who might know. The town historian, old Mr. Carter, ran the small museum on the edge of Whitby. He'd known her grandmother for years, maybe even before Nora was born. When she entered his dusty office, he looked up from a stack of papers and frowned. "Grace Whitfield's granddaughter, aren't you?" he said. "I haven't seen you since you were knee-high." Nora nodded nervously. "Mr. Carter, need to ask about my grandmother, about her dolls." His expression changed. The friendly curiosity vanished, replaced by unease. He leaned back in his chair. "You don't want to go digging there, Miss Whitfield. Best let the past rest, please," she insisted. "Something's happening in that house. I think it's connected to her work." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Your grandmother was a brilliant craftsman, but after your mother disappeared, she changed, stopped speaking to anyone, spent all her time in that shop. We used to hear singing at night, children's voices. Everyone thought she'd gone mad." Nora froze. "My mother disappeared." He nodded sadly. She went missing when you were only 3. Grace told the police she ran off to London, but..." He hesitated. "Some people think she never left the workshop." The room seemed to spin. I mean," he said quietly, "your grandmother believed she could trap a person's soul inside a doll, said it was the only way to keep them safe from death. But the things she made after your mother vanished, they didn't look like toys anymore. They looked like..." He stopped himself, face pale. "You should stay away from that place." Nora's throat was dry. "Do you still have any of her records? Anything she might have written?" He pointed to a shelf in the back corner. "There's a box of her journals there. I kept them after she passed. But if you're going to read them, be ready for what you might find." The journals back in her room. Nora opened the box with shaking hands. The journals were old and brittle, written in graceful handwriting that looked almost too neat. She flipped to one, dated October 3rd, 1989, the same year her mother vanished. The ritual worked. The spirit took to the porcelain easily. Her laughter filled the room for hours. "My sweet Eleanor will never age. She will never die." Nora's heart pounded. Eleanor, her mother's name was Eleanor Whitfield. Another entry followed. "But the others are restless. They want more. The children I used were only the beginning. They whisper to me at night, asking for playmates. I cannot silence them." Nora slammed the book shut, shaking. The dolls weren't cursed, they were alive, and her grandmother had made them that way. She had trapped children's souls inside them, including her own daughter's. Suddenly, she heard soft footsteps outside the door. A child's giggle echoed faintly. Her hands trembled. She turned toward the window, and there, on the sill, sat the missing doll. Its blank porcelain face now had painted eyes. Blue eyes, just like her mother's. The return that night. The fog rolled in thicker than ever. Nora found herself drawn back to the shop, no matter how much she fought it. It was as though something was pulling her, whispering her name over and over, until she couldn't resist. When she reached the door, it was already open, swinging gently in the cold wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of varnish and roses. The dolls lined the shelves again, their faces glowing faintly in the lamplight. On the counter lay her grandmother's diary, open to a fresh page, one that hadn't been there before. "Welcome home, my dear. Your hands are ready now." Her breath caught. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You can't have me." The doll's eyes began to shimmer. One by one, they turned toward her. The sound of their porcelain joints echoed through the workshop, soft clicks and cracks, like bones waking from sleep. Then she saw it, her grandmother's reflection in the glass cabinet, standing behind her, smiling. But when Nora spun around, the space was empty. "You can't destroy what you are," the whisper said. "You're my blood. The gift is yours now." The dolls began to move, stepping down from their shelves. Their laughter filled the air, childlike and cruel. Nora backed toward the door, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the lantern. The flame flared, lighting the dolls' faces, each one smiling wider as the fire danced in their eyes. "Stay with us, Nora," one whispered. "We miss Mufta." She screamed and ran into the street, her heart hammering. But as she turned back, the shop door slammed shut on its own, and through the window, she saw a figure standing in the flickering light. It was her grandmother, holding the doll with her mother's blue eyes, and smiling. Nora didn't remember how long she ran. The fog swallowed everything, the streets, the lamps, even the sound of her footsteps. When she finally stopped, gasping for air, she found herself standing on the cliffs overlooking the gray ocean. The waves crashed violently below, and the wind howled like a living thing. Behind her, Whitby slept beneath the mist, quiet and unaware of the nightmare unfolding within the dollmaker's shop. Nora's hands trembled as she clutched her grandmother's diary to her chest. She had grabbed it in panic before fleeing. She hadn't even realized she'd taken it until now. When she opened it, the ink seemed darker than before, almost fresh. The words on the page were no longer just her grandmother's handwriting. They were moving, twisting and forming new sentences right before her eyes. "You cannot run, Nora. The family gift must continue. Blood remembers what it owes." She slammed the book shut, her breath visible in the cold air. "Gift," she whispered. "It's a curse." She had to end it. Burn the shop, the dolls, everything. It was the only way to stop her grandmother's evil legacy. But deep down, she knew the curse wasn't tied to wood or porcelain. It was tied to her. The return. By the time Nora made it back to town, dawn had barely begun to rise. The fog had not lifted. The streets were empty, silent, and unnaturally cold. When she reached the shop, the front door stood open again, as if it had been expecting her. She hesitated. The wind carried a faint sound, a lullaby, slow and broken, playing somewhere inside, the same one she had heard all her life. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the door. The shop looked different now. The shelves were bare, the dolls gone. Only the faint footprints of tiny shoes marked the dusty floor. The air shimmered slightly, as if the walls were breathing. Nora called out, "Grandmother." Her voice echoed softly, and then, somewhere in the shadows, a reply came. "You shouldn't have run, my dear." Nora's pulse quickened. "Show yourself." From the back of the room came a faint sound, porcelain clicking together. One by one, the dolls emerged from the shadows, but they were not the same lifeless figures she had seen before. Their eyes glowed faintly, their faces shifting with emotions, sadness, anger, hunger. The doll with the blue eyes, her mother's eyes, stepped forward first. Its small porcelain hand reached toward her. "Help us, Nora," the doll whispered, its voice trembling like that of a frightened child. "She won't let us rest." Nora's heart stopped. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking. The doll nodded slowly, tears of glass sliding down its cheeks. Behind it, dozens of others gathered, whispering and crying, their voices rising into a desperate chorus. "Free us, please, free us." For a moment, Nora couldn't move. These weren't monsters. They were trapped souls, children, and maybe her own mother, imprisoned by her grandmother's dark craft. Then, a deeper, colder voice filled the room. They belonged to me. The air grew heavy. The dolls froze. From the darkness of the workshop, a figure began to form, tall, pale, and draped in a black veil. It was her grandmother, Grace Whitfield, but her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Her smile was soft but cruel. "You were born to continue my work," Grace said. "You have my hands, Nora, my gift." Nora stepped back. "You murdered them," she whispered. "You stole their lives." Grace's expression didn't change. "I gave them eternity. They never age, never fade. Don't you see? Death is the true cruelty. I freed them from it." The dolls trembled, their whispers growing frantic. "She's lying," one cried. "We burn inside." Nora's tears blurred her vision. She reached for the lantern still hanging by the door and raised it high. "I'm ending this, Grandma. Tonight." Grace's voice deepened, the sound echoing from every wall. "You can't destroy what's in your blood." The dolls began to scream, not in fear, but in pain. Their porcelain bodies cracked as something inside them tried to escape. Light burst through the fractures, flickering like trapped fireflies. The walls shook, shelves fell. The air smelled of smoke and roses. Grace's spirit advanced, her shadow stretching across the floor like black ink. "Join me, Nora. Finish what I began. Only you can perfect the craft." Nora's grip tightened on the lantern. "You were wrong," she said through clenched teeth. "You didn't make art. You made prisons." Then she threw the lantern onto the floor. The flame erupted instantly, racing across the varnish-soaked boards. Fire spread up the walls, reaching the shelves and the dolls. The porcelain began to melt and scream, voices crying out in agony and relief. Grace's spirit shrieked, her face twisting with fury. "You fool, you'll burn with them." Nora stumbled toward the door as the heat grew unbearable. Smoke filled her lungs, blinding her. She tripped, falling hard. The fire roared louder, but through it all, she saw something miraculous. The doll's eyes glowing brighter, then fading one by one, like candles being snuffed out. Her mother's doll, the one with blue eyes, knelt beside her. It smiled faintly. "Thank you," it whispered. Then it crumbled into ash. Nora crawled toward the exit, coughing, crying, desperate to reach the air outside. As she crossed the threshold, the floor gave way behind her. Flames burst through the roof, consuming the shop completely. When she fell onto the street, the world went silent except for the crackle of burning wood. The Dollmaker's secret was gone, reduced to smoke and ashes. For the first time in decades, the whispers stopped. The aftermaths later. Firefighters found Nora sitting in the middle of the street, covered in soot, holding the charred remains of a porcelain doll's arm. She said nothing, just stared at the smoking ruins. When one of the firemen asked what had happened, she simply whispered, "I set them free." They assumed she meant the fire victims, though no bodies were ever found. But that night, as Nora sat alone in her motel room, she heard it again, faint, almost like a memory, a soft child's voice, whispering from the corner of the dark room, "Play with us, Nora." And when she looked toward the sound, there, on the dresser, sat a small porcelain hand, perfectly clean, and still warm. The fire had ended, but the nightmares did not. Days passed since the night Nora burned down the Dollmaker's secret. The town of Whitby whispered her name like a curse. Some said she'd lost her mind. Others said she'd seen something in that shop that no one should ever see. But Nora knew the truth. Her grandmother's curse hadn't died in the flames. It had only changed. She saw it in the mirror the next morning, a faint gray line running across her neck, like a crack in porcelain. When she touched it, it felt cold and smooth, not like skin at all. At first, she tried to convince herself it was stress or lack of sleep, but by the third day, the cracks had spread across her shoulders. Her reflection looked wrong, her skin pale, too perfect, her eyes glassy under the morning light. She had destroyed the workshop, yes, but something inside that fire had escaped, and it had followed her. The unwanted visitor. The motel room was quiet that night, except for the wind tapping against the window. Nora sat on the bed, her grandmother's half-burned diary open in her lap. She had kept it, unable to throw it away. The last page was blank until now. Words began to appear, written in dark ink that seemed to bleed from nowhere. "My work is complete. My dear, you are my masterpiece." Nora's hand shook as she closed the book. The air grew heavy and sweet, smelling faintly of roses. Her heart froze. That scent, her grandmother's perfume. She turned toward the mirror. Grace Whitfield stood behind her reflection, smiling softly. Her veil was gone, her face cracked like porcelain but still beautiful in a horrifying way. "You freed them, Nora," Grace said in that same calm, ghostly voice. "But not me. You carried me with you." Nora stumbled back, shaking her head. "No, you're gone. I destroyed you." Grace stepped closer in the mirror, though she wasn't truly there. Her voice was soft and almost loving. "You can't destroy what you are. You didn't end the curse. You became it." The mirror rippled like water, and a pale hand reached through the glass. It brushed against Nora's face. Her skin turned colder. The cracks deepened, spreading over her cheeks. She screamed and swung the diary at the mirror. It shattered into pieces, shards raining onto the carpet. But the reflection inside didn't disappear. Grace's face still looked out from every shard, whispering from a dozen tiny mouths, "Finish what I began." The final workshop. The next morning, Nora woke on the floor, surrounded by broken glass. Her hands were covered in fine white dust, not ash, but porcelain powder, the same kind used for making dolls. Her skin beneath the dust gleamed faintly, too smooth, too polished. There was only one thing left she could do: go back, end it properly. She packed a small bag and walked to the edge of town, where the blackened ruins of the doll shop still smoked faintly. The locals avoided it, crossing the street when they passed. But as Nora approached, she saw something impossible. The building was there again, restored, whole, the paint fresh, the windows gleaming. The sign above the door swung gently in the wind. "The Dollmaker's Secret, EST, 1892." Her blood ran cold. "No, it burned," she whispered. "I saw it burn." The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside. Everything was back. The shelves, the tools, even the scent of varnish and roses. The only thing missing was the dolls. The counter in the center of the room held a single note in her grandmother's handwriting. "Every artist leaves a legacy. The final creation is always the truest reflection." And beside it, a small lump of unshaped porcelain clay sat waiting. Nora's hands trembled. She could feel her grandmother's presence all around her, in the air, in the walls, in her own heartbeat. "No," she whispered, "you won't use me." But her hands, her traitorous, trembling hands, moved on their own. They picked up the sculpting knife. The clay was soft and warm, almost pulsing. Voices filled the room, the children's laughter, her mother's song, her grandmother's whispers. "You know what to do, my dear. Shape it, give it life." Tears streamed down Nora's face as she sculpted. Her body moved as though guided by invisible strings. Hours passed. When she finally stopped, she looked down at what she'd made. A doll. Its face was her own, perfectly carved, empty eyes staring up at her. She dropped the knife and stumbled backward. Nadal blinked. "You made me," it whispered. The shop lights flickered. The walls shook. Her grandmother's laughter echoed from every direction. "Now sleep, Nora. Your part is done." Nora screamed as her legs turned to stone. No, not stone, porcelain. Her skin hardened, pale and cold. The transformation crawled upward, freezing her chest, her arms, her throat. Her vision blurred as the world darkened. The last thing she saw was her reflection in the doll's glossy eyes, her own face, still frozen in silent terror. Then, everything went black. Epilogue. A month later, the shop reopened. The locals said it was under new ownership, but no one ever saw who ran it. The window display changed weekly, showcasing beautiful new dolls, lifelike, detailed, and hauntingly familiar. One of them had brown hair and blue-gray eyes that seemed to follow anyone who passed by. A tiny brass nameplate rested beneath it: Nora Whitfield, the last creation. At night, when the streets were quiet and the fog rolled in, some swore they heard faint tapping from inside the shop window, like porcelain fingers, asking to be let out.